Today is my official 4 months in California. Yesterday was officially 4 months since I left for California and since I took the train, and it took a long time. Today is 4 months since I've been here, and so much has changed, which I've talked about along the way. Other changes I've noticed just today is that my face is changing. I've been on meds for 6 years, so maybe I don't even know what my face is supposed to really look like when the toxins come out of my skin and my muscles and my cells, and the extra maybe bloating or water that would be there along with it. So who knows? I also think my eyes look a bit different. I think that frown mark like this is disappearing a bit as my face relaxes. And I've talked about it, how it seems that there's changes in the face muscles to go along with how the medications change how one feels, which is kind of numbed out and kind of like, So I feel a bit lighter through here and through here, and who knows. And also, yesterday I went to the hot springs, and as I was driving there, I heard the voice of my supporter at Hardy Nutritional saying, "Don't do anything that will make you detox too fast. Let the body do it naturally. Don't lay in the sun too much. Don't go in saunas or get too hot." And there's a heat wave where I am in California, and I went to the hot springs last night, so I actually didn't sit all the way in the water too much, but I still feel kind of groggy today, like it probably did speed up the detox process somewhat. And during this time in California, I've actually spent a lot of time indoors talking to myself instead of outside in the beauty, but I hope, given the process I've been through, coming off my medication and everything, that the time has been well spent, and working on my relationship with myself and knowing myself has been beneficial. And this morning I was talking to somebody about ozone therapy, and it sounds like I might have the opportunity to try it on Friday next week. But then again, the voice of my supporter at Hardy Nutritionals came in and said, "Don't do anything that speeds up the detox process." So I'm not sure if ozone therapy speeds up the detox process or if it just supports the detox process. So I might speak to the woman who does this therapy and ask. And it's basically injecting ozone into the veins. So I'm not sure if I'll do it, but maybe I'll do it when I get home, because it's about oxygenation, and somebody was describing to me how they felt after and they had more energy. And I've talked at times about the importance of oxygen and how even self-dialogue might increase the oxygen to one's brain, because different areas of the brain are being activated and what the brain's always learning and renewing itself. So anything to support that process I'm kind of curious about. So I might try it, I might not. I'm going to ask if it's something that's advisable for someone with a bipolar label. And it might not be advisable to do it while I'm still in the United States. I might not want to mess with the slow, easy process that I'm going through, but I do want to keep it in mind for one day. So I was trying to look up ozone therapy and bipolar, but I couldn't really find information. But then I stumbled upon a website of this doctor who does intravenous ketamine therapy, of all things. And beside it, it said for bipolar, PTSD, and depression. And I was like, what the heck is this? I've never heard of this in my life. So then I came across a website, ketamineadvocacynetwork.org, and I was looking at it. And I really don't think this is something I'm going to try, as I don't really think it applies to me. It's for treatment-resistant depression and bipolar and things. But I was looking in the frequently asked questions part, and it says there can be rapid relief lasting several days, depending on how people respond. Some people respond to one infusion, some people it takes multiple, some people don't respond at all. So that's not what I'm interested in pointing this out. What I am interested in is how, under the how it works question in the frequently asked questions, it says ketamine is completely different from SSRIs, etc. The exact mechanism that causes ketamine to relieve depression is still under study and is quite complex. In short, When ketamine is administered in a very precise way, it triggers a cascading sequence of events in the brain, which ultimately results in the regrowth of neurons that previously died off. It is thought by some researchers that prolonged exposure to stress causes these neurons to die off in the first place, resulting in depression, but ketamine causes them to rapidly regrow within hours, relieving the depressive symptoms. This is an oversimplification of a very complex topic, and the latest research hints there may be several other mechanisms involved that also play important roles. And then they have a link to their research database. So what I'm interested in here is how they talk about the regrowth of neurons and how, in this case, ketamine stimulates that. And I've talked to myself at some point along the self-dialogue about how there's some kind of process involved in bipolar which has to do with regrowth of neurons or faster growth of neurons or pruning of neurons. And all this I sort of just came upon in my own brain by just talking to myself and making sense out of things from just a little bit of reading on neuroscience and bringing in a lot of different things and coming up with it through my own insights, which just arises through talking to myself. And who knows if it's right or anything, but I just find it interesting that this ketamine therapy is something that can help people who basically are very often on the verge of suicide due to their depressive feelings or so-called bipolar disorder, and it can help those people. And so to say that there's a therapy that basically causes the neurons to regrow and that causes relief, and that process is what I'm kind of interested in, not in necessarily ketamine therapy, but I wonder if ozone therapy might help in the oxygenation of getting the oxygen to the parts of the body that don't usually get the oxygen because the energy has to go in the brain that might have to do with meaning and other parts of life that aren't with the basic biological functioning. Those would actually go through a process of dying back first before eliminating brain structures that we need to breathe and all those things. So I just thought it was interesting that it says people take this intravenous ketamine and then their brain cells grow and then they don't feel depressed. So anything that helps to grow brain cells would possibly play a role in alleviating some of this. And I feel in bipolar there's a process of hyper brain cell growth and then this sort of pruning back of that, and that's sort of a cycle of brain growth that could actually be important, sort of like waves crashing against the shore and the tide coming in and out. So it's a different rhythm in the brain than the one that is thought to be normal and consistent. And maybe if we understood it in different ways like this, and I'm not saying that's the only way to understand it or think about it, then it wouldn't be so scary and it wouldn't be so weird and it wouldn't be so abnormal. It's just something different. It's the brain trying to find a different rhythm than the one that we live by in society and is creating all this havoc. And the brain can see that. It's not stupid. It's the seat of intelligence itself. It's what intelligence can filter through. And even if we're not necessarily operating intelligently because we're just reacting to programs in our conditioning, there's still a small aspect, at least, of intelligence there witnessing the not so intelligent things happening in the world through our eyes. And it's taken into the collective calculation of humanity and Gaia, and the brain adjusts based on the whole calculation, not just one's little life that we're trying to find meaning in, but the whole thing. And I'm just making that up, and I've had a sense of that, and I'm not having it necessarily now, but maybe I'm speaking from the senses that I have had through some of my experiences. And those senses and those experiences and those whatever they are want to be given voice to in some way, because if it can be integrated, then it actually can be something that is beneficial. So if we know, for example, that we need more oxygen as people who are in these states and get ozone therapy or hyperbaric oxygen therapy or start doing sprints to build our VO2 max, or very oxygen specific things, like maybe some people can invert, or lots of different things that can be done for oxygen, or actually living in an area where there is more oxygen in the air and it's not so polluted. And so it was kind of fun today to have someone say something, and then I looked it up, and then I actually found something completely different based on that I've never heard of before, and then just not even looking at it as something I want to do, because I don't feel like I have treatment resistant depression or anxiety or things like that. But it's just interesting to see the similarities and the parallels in different research and things, even if it's just a tiny summary on a page of a particular type of treatment that I'm not interested in. But I'm interested in anything that says that maybe people that are at the verge of ending their life need something to really jumpstart that. But how do we go with that and build on that? And I feel like we, as people who have a bipolar label, actually need more oxygen. We need more brain growth. It's not just allowing the waves of the brain to grow and go up and down and grow and subside like the tide coming in and out, but us actually intelligently getting with that process to see how can we fill in the gaps in our brain as it's attempting to grow through this natural rhythm. How can we design our life intelligently to allow the brain not just to grow like this, but to sort of fill in everything else by our daily actions, and not actually have the brain grow like this in the cells and we're actually reacting to it and fearing it and causing that contraction because we're not understanding what the brain's trying to do and getting with it. So if the brain was sending a signal that led to a feeling of hunger, and we were afraid of that feeling of hunger, and we were like, oh my gosh, I'm in pain, what is that, something's wrong with me, then we might not eat, we might not understand what's going on. But the brain is sending signals, and when it's sending signals that make us have certain sensations, which aren't hunger, but they're sensations, we're not understanding what those are saying. It could just be the growing pains of the brain and saying, the brain is growing, and how do we get with that growth? So if the body's growing and we're an infant, and there's the time that comes that it's time to walk, but we just say, well, I'm not going to try walking because I tried once and it didn't work. Well, then it's not going to grow the brain with the action of the body. So there's something happening with growing the brain with the action of the body, and we just don't know what those actions are. It's something like walking or eating, but it's just other aspects of humanity that we haven't really fully understood and come into full embodiment of. And they could be completely new capacities of being a human being that we just aren't aware of. But we can become aware, just like a child becomes aware that all of a sudden it has grown enough and developed the neural pathways enough through its playing and chaos and wondering and looking, and then all of a sudden it understands that it can take steps, and maybe from watching the steps of others, but it's also understanding that now this organism can take some steps. So we're not recognizing that there's some steps that we can take. There's something that wants us to move in a certain way. So I feel like lifestyle design factors and embodiment factors, and again, harvesting one's mania or experience, or harvesting one's altered states to see how that was moving us, to see if we can move that way when not in those states, to move those states into traits. And that would be the same as if the brain was ready for the infant to walk, but it only tried once. It would never develop fully everything it needs in order to walk in every situation. So in the same way, if we are just afraid of these rhythms of the brain after the first time, we're never going to learn what it's trying to give us the sense that we're able to do and look completely different. Instead of spending all of our energy doing XYZ, maybe we have a similar energy, but now we're doing ABC, and maybe that is more fulfilling and leads to a different unfoldment of life, and And the more people are able to do that, a different humanity, perhaps. Maybe subtly, maybe in big ways. Who knows? We don't really know, and we haven't really given that a chance. We're so busy trying to fix the problem, we don't see that it actually could be part of the solution. And it's also interesting that I met a very interesting person recently, and why it's interesting to me is that this person seems to have gone through some things and managed to come out the other side without being labeled with anything, and still seems to exhibit certain qualities that might actually be called manic. Like, there's this energy, and I'm kind of drawn to it because it's sort of the energy that I've sensed before myself, but was warped and pathologized, so I became afraid of it. And even if I'm not really afraid now, I'm still afraid in a way, because if that energy took over and actually was integrated, my life would look different and I would be different, and that would be perhaps uncomfortable for people I know. But this person showed up just as a stranger in a strange place and can be any way. And it's interesting to watch that unfold, and it's a little bit magical, and this person sort of asking, like, what can we create, and all these questions that I would have for myself. And it's interesting timing again with the clarity I'm feeling, and I see this energy as something that I want to be a part of, and that has been a part of me in the past. And all of a sudden, when I'm off the meds and I'm starting to talk about things happening congruently in reality without having that state. So it's different to have a state of consciousness and be alone in a certain perception of how the world works. Like, oh, it's magical, or I feel so powerful. And then it's another thing for one to feel in a pretty clear and good state and have those things in reality actually appear as magical, like a person actually showing up and being like, life is magical, and why aren't we living, and like, what can we create, and things like that. And I'm thinking to myself, these are exactly the questions I have, and this is exactly how I would be, but as this own manifestation of this being, if I was in that state. And so I'm wondering if this person is inviting me into that state, or if I'm to just observe this person in this state and how they've somehow managed to be this way. And it's really fascinating. It's almost like experiencing someone in mania who isn't in mania. And it's something that I can't really describe, but the timing is interesting, and the place, and I've been thinking, oh, I'm going home in a month or so, and then I'll go home and blah blah blah. And with this person, I just feel like I could be on the other side of the world and never go home. I don't know. So I just feel like my life has possibly taken an interesting turn that I had no idea would show up. And I'm in this place where I'm open to things like that showing up possibly. And so I feel like if I don't look at that or consider that in some way, I'm actually missing exactly what I'm looking for. And I'm not saying this person is what I'm looking for per se. It's that energy and that aliveness and that vulnerability and that wisdom, and I'm wondering if that's like a preview of what could be, except in this version of a human being, in this human being. And it would still look different for me, but it's just interesting to watch. And then at the same time, I have the holotropic breath lady saying, do everything to stay grounded. Don't do anything to possibly get yourself into an altered state without a safe container. So I have this ozone thing, and I'm like, oh, I'm curious, but don't detox too fast. And this person that has this energy, and I recognize it, and I speak that language, and I understand. And then at the same time, it's inviting me into possibly an altered state. And I think I talked about how the other day I was in a bit of a different dimension, just witnessing this person speak and how they are. And then I ate a burrito, and I was like, oh, I need to get grounded. And now this person's here kind of, I don't know, it's interesting, and I really don't know what's going to happen. But I'm very curious. I'm curious mainly, like, how did this person pull this off? How were they able to go through this and come out the other side and not be labeled? And one of the reasons is they were in another country. They were not in a Western country. And this person shared a bit of experience, and the whole time I'm just thinking to myself, they would be in a psych ward if that happened here. And there's no doubt in my mind about that. And that didn't happen, so here they are, this embodiment of possibly going through that and finishing with certain things. And so I wonder, will I have to go through more and come out the other side, or am I out the other side? Or am I kidding myself? Is there still so much more to be done? And I'm a little bit uncomfortable. Here I am talking to myself, thinking I'm just going to talk to myself until I go home, and then whatever. And there's people saying, let's create a respite. And I just feel like anything could happen. I don't know. And there's a few more days until I want to wrap up this conversation more about mental health. So I feel like the universe is sending me a message, like, look at this individual and look at your life, and what is it that you really want to embody. It's interesting, the timing, and everything is interesting. And this person is the one that gave me that insight, not by saying it to me, but just in conversation, that life doesn't give up. Maybe life doesn't give up trying to create meaning, to create better life. I don't know what it is. And I wonder if we bring up ideas in order to protect them. And I feel like that's something that I haven't done in this self-dialogue process. I brought up a lot of different ideas and insights, not to protect them, but just to bring up ideas and insights and see what happens. Watch what happens, not try to make something happen. So it's become more about energy, perhaps, and I wonder why that energy gets labeled and pathologized. And I feel like so-called psychosis could be inner self-talk of the entire universe, of Gaia, as well as the personal karma. So it's not just an individual thing. And that's the thing that the process shows, is that we're not individuals, and life is not an individual process. We're actually very interconnected. And to me, it seems like there are the speaking about people and the speaking as people. People that are always speaking about their life or speaking about something, and people that just speak as the perception of the moment and as that energy of life itself. And it seems like this person that I met is kind of like that. And it's interesting to observe. I'm sort of in this observation phase and just really curious, and it's almost like observing the epigesturetics of this person and how they move and act and speak. And it's really fascinating. And it seems like we live in a movement of problems, a movement to fix that which the movement of problems created. So when we're always going from problem to problem, we're living in a continuity of problem, and the one who thinks it can solve the problem separates itself from the problem and thinks it can solve it, but it's actually part of the problem. The problem maker is the problem. So that could be important in realizing that this bipolar process or map consciousness process is not necessarily a problem, but this entity of the ego comes in and makes it a problem and says, well, that's not how I used to be, or that's not how I've lived my life, and other people and doctors coming in and saying it's a problem, when the movement of something other than the problem maker, this energy of so-called bipolar, could actually be something that is trying to break up this problem maker. And it's a different movement of life that once it breaks up the problem maker, there might be a movement that doesn't move in problems at all, but just moves with life. can we move in the discontinuity of creation as opposed to the continuity of problems? And perhaps this creative movement is everything that's not the ego. And that movement is happening, so maybe it's moving in such a way to dissolve that which would impede this creative element that we're all a part of and capable of, and that's not separate from us. And the non-creative element, the ego, makes us feel separate. And this person said, if we grow intelligently, it has worldwide effects, and that's how we help. And that, to me, just sounded really beautiful. And he's really able to express things. And I wonder if one day I might go from expressing meaning to just expression itself, because meaning still seems to separate from the moment somewhat, still in retrospect. It's different than just acting on the meaning of the moment, which is translated into action, and the meaning is dropped to make room for the next meaning and the next action. And maybe one day that's so fast that, and so infinite, that trying to actually say some of those meanings is meaningless. If there's infinite meaning, then meaning itself becomes meaningless in a way. It's like trying to count the molecules in the air in order to breathe. It's not necessary. And I feel maybe when that happens, I'll just speak and I won't look at notes at all. I'll take notes from the moment. It'll tell me what to say. Not by telling me in a voice or anything, but when there's no separation, there's contact, then something else just speaks. So that's the difference. The speaking about, I'm still speaking about mental illness, and at least for now. And that's the thing, there's no continuity to reality, so I'm living in a different reality right now. And if something happens where I have to take meds again, it's just a different reality altogether. It's not the same life, it's different. Speaking from this level of consciousness is just a completely different thing. There's no continuity.